big client base and friendship base that I have are mums who have about 1 million kids under the age of 5, women who've had accomplished careers from anything from finance to design to advertising, and of course they take time out to have bubs in succession, which so you should. And then there comes a time when this youngest kid is over 3 or maybe even over 6 months old, and it's time for daycare, and the mother is contemplating her identity again and wanting to go back into the workforce. And it's a scary place for anybody that's had a break, but specifically for a mum, because a mum has certain, not demands, but requests that she needs of the workplace and flexibility. And I've always been scared of workplaces myself until I met my beautiful friend Kylie Butler, who is another goddess who's sitting here with me. Kylie has had an incredible career in recruitment, talent management, HR that has spanned a long time. You wouldn't know by looking at her because she looks about 18. But Kylie is somebody who has heart, has wisdom, has beauty, and has substance, and she deeply understands women. But more tellingly, she understands the workplaces of today. And she has used her incredible human resource, talent management, recruitment, and career knowledge to start Inspired Careers Coaching, which is, as it sounds, a coaching business to help people feel empowered and passionate and in love with everything to do with the workplace, from the job hunt to promotion to exit and beyond. So I brought Kylie in today, made her drive all the way across the bridge so that I could make this video for my dear friends and anyone else who's interested and anyone else that's had a bit of a break from the workplace but wants to come back and is perhaps lacking the skills or the confidence. There's the internal stuff like, can I do this? Has my workplace moved on? Will I find a job? Am I okay to leave my kids? How is my boss going to feel about the fact that I'm a mum? To the very much external things like, is my industry in the decline? I used to work in publishing. But anyway, I have no idea what to do there and I have no answers, but thank heavens Kylie does. So Kylie, thank you so much for coming and chatting to us. What are you observing is happening for women in general in workplaces and mums? Because I'm reading some things that it is getting better, that workplaces are striving to become more and more flexible. So can you begin with saying something reassuring to the mothers that want to get their old job back or better?
Well, firstly, I'll say, I agree with you in terms of the fact that it is getting better. A real bugbear of mine is the fact that it's not getting better fast enough. The day and age that we're in at the moment, the fact that there's still such inequality in the workforce and some really antiquated thinking around flexible working that puts some limitations on women is something that I'm actually really actively involved in changing. But good news is it is getting better. A lot of the barriers to success for women coming back into the workforce are those inner battles that you mentioned. It's the lack of confidence, the fear. People are afraid that they've still got baby brain, and it really is. It's this internal dialogue that is the most restrictive, and a fear of the unknown, depending on how long the woman's been out of the workforce for. And look, some of the fears are legitimate in terms of if you're working in, marketing or comms or digital, which moves so quickly. But the good news is, and the fact that we're so connected now, and there are so many amazing online resources, videos that you can find on YouTube, like this one, there is so many. There's podcasts, you can, Amy Porterfield, online marketing made easy. There is so many resources available to women so they can actually get, upskilled, ready to go back into the workforce easier than they ever could have before. And the fact that we're so connected now too makes it easier to balance the responsibilities of motherhood and the workplace. Now, in terms of the good news, the progressive employers are looking to bring more flexibility into the workplace, and it's the progressive employers that you want to work for. It is the Googles and the Facebooks and a lot of businesses in a range of industries, pharmaceuticals, FMCG, the people that really have the fact that HR now has a seat at the table in terms of in the senior leadership. Means that still not enough women on the senior leadership tables.
So what are progressive employers doing, such as Google?
So what they're doing is essentially, allowing more flexibility. But really, they're leading the charge in terms of the change in how we actually work and remunerate people. So what used to happen is that you rock up at work for a certain amount of time and you got paid for that, and you did 2 years and you got paid, and then I think we talked about this before, you do a number of years and you get a watch. Whereas now, work is not so much about the tenure, it's actually about the outcomes. So, and the more that we move away from paying and rewarding people for tenure and actually paying and rewarding them for outcomes, then it makes the workforce a lot more flexible. When you're paid to do a certain job, to deliver certain deliverables, then you can do that from wherever. It doesn't matter, as long as, it's sure with a lot of roles you've got to spend some time in the office to develop those key relationships, but it just gives more power to the individual who's actually working to be responsible for delivering and then finding the most effective way of doing it. And that makes it a lot easier to juggle with children and responsibilities and drop-off times and those types of things. So that is a fundamental shift.
And I think it's important to note, a lot of traditional workplaces are a bit iffy about flexibility because they think, well, if you're not in there clocking in an 8 or 9 hour day, what are you doing? But people are generally unproductive. They probably work about 4 hours out of that. So if anybody is super productive, it's the mother who has learned how to put her whole day into the span of 2 hours while her child sleeps.
And there's actually a lot of evidence around it now, some fascinating articles that have proven that women are actually much better employers because ultimately what employers are paying you for is to get something done. Whatever it is they're asking you to get shit done, make stuff happen. And that's what mothers are really good at. So when they have children, their organisational capabilities get really enhanced. Their time management skills get enhanced. Their ability to be more tolerant and more patient and more empathetic. So there's actually been some fascinating studies done that really show that women are not, there used to be some preconceived ideas that, mothers are not going to be focused when they're on the job because, their heart's somewhere else. But in essence, it's actually quite different. And especially if you have a woman working part-time. It's that old saying, if you want something done, give it to somebody who's busy.
That's right.
Well, that's exactly what happens when you give a mother who's juggling her responsibilities at home and the workplace. They really just get things done and make things happen. So, as I was saying, the whole the real challenge with women entering back into the workforce is their false belief that and the employers aren't going to believe them, aren't going to trust them, that they've got behind. And sometimes it's just a little bit daunting going from one world to the next. It's just a significant amount of change from being at home with the kids and play group to, sitting in a corporate office with the bigwigs. It's just, but again, that's just a mindset change that people need to get around. And often they find once they're back into the workforce, and assuming that they make the smart decisions to join the right place for them, which is not necessarily the place that they were before, then they'll find that they'll adapt pretty quickly. Let me go back to that last point as well, saying that's not necessarily the place they were before. So often women's priorities can shift significantly. So to step out where you were, go and have 1, 2, 3. How many children do you say your friends have?
10 children under the age of 5.
Have a football team worth of children.
About 2 or 3.
Yeah. If you go back in to that same employer, sometimes things would have changed, and it can be particularly challenging. I myself, most of my friends will have kids as well, and when if you have to go back in and report to somebody who perhaps reported to you, things like that can be pretty daunting and really hard to adapt back to those environments. So sometimes it's best to have a fresh start somewhere else. I suppose my advice would probably be 2-tiered here. If you've got an employer that's fantastic and you love that job and they understand you and they can meet your requirements if you want to go back part-time, that can work really well because you've done the hard yards and developed your credibility and respect there, and they're happy to to give you a flexible arrangement because they know you're good, that's great. Like, absolutely capitalize on that. If that's not the case and you just feel like you want to go back to your old employer because despite some of the issues that you had there before, you feel a bit safer going back to your previous employer rather than somewhere completely new, that'd be even more daunting. My advice would be don't actually go for a fresh start.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what is a great qualifying conversation that a woman can have with a potential employer?
Yeah, good question. I think, firstly, I mean, even going into the interview room, know now that it's a two-way conversation and the balance of power is not with the employer. The unemployment rates in Australia are so low and there are far more great jobs than there are great candidates. There really are.
Oh.
So going in, when you're asking for hours to really work, to really suit you, that makes it a little bit more challenging. But ultimately, I think the person needs to know that the balance of power doesn't sit all with the employer, and also to go in with those questions prepared. I think the important thing is to demonstrate that you have the competencies and capabilities for the role. So the employer sold on you, then you've got more of that power, and then you've got more flexibility. So go in, have done your research and make sure that you really have the competencies to do the role, the experience to do the role, that you're a cultural fit for the role and you're able to demonstrate that at interview. And then when it gets to salary negotiation time, then at that point, I mean, up front, you've got to say, this is my availability, and be really open. So I wouldn't go for a full-time job and then at the third and final interview go, by the way, I want to work 3 days. You want to be upfront about the parameters in the initial conversations, and then when it gets later down the path, when they really want you to, that's when you really nut out a deal that works for you.
From what you said previously, it feels like a woman should actually really celebrate and own the fact that she's a mother in selling herself. As an employer, I would want anybody that can get a big amount of workload achieved in half the time on my team. And should women be ashamed to present those examples?
No, absolutely not. And I think that's where there needs to be that mindset shift for them before they even go into having those conversations with the potential employer. So to really know previously, I am shit hot, and not only was I shit hot before I had kids, I've even got more skills to go back to the workforce in. And then having those conversations with the employer, it's coming from that stance of not having to justify. It's not like, sorry, buddy, I've been out for 12 months and I might be a bit behind, but hopefully you'll bear with me while I stay up to date. No, it's to come into those conversations and say, yeah, this is what I've previously done. I've had this time out with children. Sometimes people have also done some interesting projects and stuff while they've had the children. What other committees have they been on? Have they done any kind of real estate deals? There's often things that they have done that they can also bring to the table that they can discuss, depending on how long they've been since their last kind of full-time or corporate role. And then just to go in with that mindset around, I've got all this and I can bring any more. So not on the back foot.
Yeah, beautiful. And again, we both mentioned studies about how very often the 8-hour workday is unproductive. People go on Facebook for 3 hours. The mind is only designed to work in short chunks. I only read a study today that the most productive people on earth work for 53 minutes, have 17 minutes off, and on they go. So perhaps the mother can go in equipped with statistics saying that short work bursts are productive. So her as a freelancer from time to time can be even more of a return on investment than someone who's just there all day and they've kind of switched off after the 3 p.m. chocolate.
Look, that's a good idea. In fact, I'm just thinking I might put a few of the stats up, and we can put those in the show notes.
Exactly.
A few of the stats. So yeah, absolutely. Because you don't want to be going in there selling hard. If somebody's got a really antiquated mindset, that's probably not a place you want to join anyway, because you might get through the first hurdle of getting a job, but you still going to have to deal with that prehistoric attitude later on. Yeah, I think it's good to be ready to rebut any of those questions, or just be armed with the information.
Yes, and it brings me to sort of a final thought. I used to always say to my clients and friends, rock your uglies. The thing that you think is a disadvantage is actually the most beautiful thing about you. So I almost think sounds like it would be a great exercise for everything that a mother is feeling a little bit apprehensive about entering the workforce. Perhaps that is the very advantage she could spin around and sell. Have you got any examples in your career coaching where that has happened in general, when somebody came to you, maybe it was even a man or another client who thought their experience was completely going to set them back, and then you worked with them and it ended up being an asset?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the time, people come to me and say they're really concerned because of career gaps that they've had. They say, "Oh, my CV looks patchy. How do I overcome that?" Or they've had some unethical employer that's, I've had a few instances of this actually, and, they've been let go, or they've left an organisation because the principles and the values of that organisation didn't match their own. And they come to me going, well, how can I kind of bypass that, or how can I hide it, sweep it under the carpet, make excuses for it? But often the career gaps will say, well, why were you out? Well, I was travelling. 6 months on your own through South America, that's awesome. Let's put that in there. That adds another dimension to who you are and what you've looked to achieve. And again, sometimes people say, oh, it looks really patchy because I was doing all this contracting. Okay, well, let's say, look, let's just package that up and say that, you've got great tenure early in your career where you did a 3-year stint somewhere, but you've got, a year and a half or 2 years when you only did really short patches. So let's say that in that period is where you're really exploring and getting clear on what was going to be the right career for you, and you didn't want to do the wrong thing by committing to a permanent job when you were in that mindset. So you did your research, you now know what's the right role for you, and that's what you're talking to this particular person because you're committed to it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can just look at the positives. And I think in a lot of those instances, it adds depth to that person's application for sure.
Yeah, and I think that is becoming more and more common with people taking time off and shifting and changing. And I mean, our children or even grandchildren are probably not even going to know the 9 to 5 concept anymore.
I hope not, because it doesn't work.
Okay, what's interesting. So why? I mean, whole careers and empires and this whole system was built on the 9 to 5.